أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We continue our examination of the fourth pillar of religion, the fourth asl of usul ad-din, which is the discussion on imamah, the belief in the successorship after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We examined previously the conditions of an imam in Sunni discourse and theology. How does a person become an imam? We examined that. Now we will examine imamah in Shi'i beliefs, according to the path of Ahlul Bayt. What are the conditions for an imam? How does a person become an imam to begin with? What is the role of the imam? These are very significant discussions that have to do with the core of our faith. So it is very important for us to discuss this in depth and in detail. According to Shi'i theology, imamah is not a secondary issue like we see in Sunni beliefs. It is in fact part of religion, part of deen. It's part of usul ad-din, not part of furu' ad-din, the branches of faith, as we examined last week. Imamah is exactly like the position of prophethood, with the only difference that the imam does not receive official revelation. The prophet is chosen by God, the prophet is infallible. The same applies to the imam. The only difference really is that the prophet receives official revelation and delivers that message to the people, whereas the imam does not receive official revelation. Otherwise, all conditions that you find in a prophet are found in the imam. This is because the imam fills pretty much the same role that a prophet does. What is the role of a prophet? Let's ask. The prophet has many roles, but three are very important. One role of the Prophet ﷺ was to explain the Holy Quran, to provide the proper application for the Quranic verses, to clarify that which is ambiguous, that which is not clear. The Prophet doesn't just recite verses to us. No, he explains to us the meaning and the tafsir of those verses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ. Allah says we have revealed down the Quran, the dhikr, the remembrance, so that you explain to the people, you clarify to the people. That's one role of the Prophet. Another role of the Prophet is to respond to questions. Anyone who has a question, Muslim, non-Muslim, difficult question, easy question, the Prophet would answer those questions on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And number three, the Prophet would explain legal fiqhi issues and matters that people face in their everyday lives. These are the three main roles of the Prophet. Let's ask the following question. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away and departed, there was a big gap. The Prophet was fulfilling these three roles. When he passed away, who fulfills these roles for us? There is now a big gap in the Muslim Ummah. Who's going to explain the proper tafsir of Quran? Who's going to answer the questions? To defend the religion and explain religion? Who's going to explain to people legal matters? We have here two options, two ideas, two paths. Let's choose one of them. Two possibilities. Either the Ummah is mature enough and qualified enough such that they could fulfill this very important role. They could undertake these responsibilities, offer the proper tafsir, They answer people's questions. They defend the religion. They explain legal issues. That's one possibility. The other possibility is for the Prophet to appoint someone who represents him, and he will fulfill this role. Really, these are the two possibilities that we have. Otherwise, you have a gap, you have a void, you have to fill it somehow. Allah is not just going to leave us to try to, figure this out when this is part of our faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to show us. Let's look at the first possibility. That the ummah is qualified enough, they can figure it out themselves. What do you think about this? That the ummah can figure it out themselves. The tafsir of the Quran, all that knowledge, all those legal details, answering tough questions. The biggest proof that the ummah cannot figure this out is all the disagreements that we have when it comes to the Holy Quran. Pick up the books of tafasir, the books of exegesis. You will find in almost every verse, there's differences of opinion. So where's the correct tafsir of the Quran? Obviously, the ummah is not solving this dilemma for us because the ummah have thousands of views. Whose view do you take? Who? There is no unanimous agreement that this is the tafsir of the Quran, as an example. The ummah cannot fulfill this for us. Even basic everyday issues like wudu, the verse of the wudu, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wash your face, your two, hands, arms, and then your feet. Allah says, wipe your head, and then your feet. Do what to your feet? Wash the feet according to the Sunni understanding of the verse, or wipe the mess on the feet according to the explanation of the Ahlul Bayt and the Shia understanding. Which one do you choose? The ummah is just going to confuse you, right? If you want to leave matters to the ummah, they're going to confuse you. So we cannot possibly say that the ummah over here can figure things out for us. Look at very important issues like jabr, tafweed, hidayah, predestination, free will. After the Prophet ﷺ, there was chaos in the Muslim ummah. Some Muslims believed in predestination. Everything we do, we're predestined to. You don't have free will, really. God decides everything, and everything you do, every action you commit is done by God. And then you had different sects. What does guidance mean? These very important matters, the ummah, were split about them. Would God deliver the truth to me through a split ummah that they cannot even agree on anything? Really? Even God, look at their disagreements on God. The qualities of God, the attributes of God. Justice, is that part of the attributes of God? Some say yes, some say no. As we saw last year when we talked about the justice of God and the Ash'ari view, right? Even simple things like that. There is no unanimous agreement. So the ummah cannot fulfill the role of a prophet. The prophet gives you clear truths. The prophet does not confuse you. The prophet gives you haqq, 100% haqq. The ummah confuses you. So the ummah cannot take the position of a prophet when it comes to explaining the truths to the newer generations who were not there. Yes?
You said the ummah can't fulfill the role of a prophet, but we're following people like Sistani, Khomeini, Khamenei.
We'll get to that. We'll mention that very briefly. Let's take this step by step. So our question is a logical question. Will God appoint someone to show us the truths? Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the Prophet departed, you guys figure it out somehow. Is that logical for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do something like that? Let's look at fiqh issues. The Holy Quran, if you examine those verses that speak about ahkam, legal matters, rulings, there are only 300 verses. Out of 6,236 verses, only 300 verses talk about legal matters. The Prophet in his lifetime did not explain every legal issue. The Quran does not in detail explain every legal issue. So you need someone after the Prophet to explain what the Prophet ﷺ did not have the opportunity to examine in depths. So, as for the hadiths from the Prophet ﷺ about legal matters, there are about 500. So do you think that is sufficient for all these generations to come after and they have thousands of legal issues, 500 hadiths and 300 verses? Is that sufficient to cover the very details? Of course not. Many, many times, Omar and Abu Bakr would be asked questions and they did not know the answer to, because there was no precedent during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They couldn't remember a hadith from the Prophet, a situation, an incident, an event, a precedent, in order to answer questions like that. The Prophet ﷺ in Mecca did not have the freedom to explain legal matters. The Muslims were persecuted. The Prophet's priority was aqa'id in Mecca. Just the belief in God and the Day of Judgment, really. Kept it simple. When he went to Medina, so many problems were there. Civil wars, establishing a community, hypocrites to deal with. The Prophet spent a lot of time defending his community. Sometimes when he would go to war, it could take 2 months for him to go, settle there and come back. So the Prophet did not have enough time to explain all legal details. So after the Prophet, you would see those caliphs were asked questions they did not know the answer to. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. When Abu Bakr was the Khalifa, a drunk man, a man who was drunk, a drunken man, was brought to him. Now according to the Holy Quran, if these conditions are fulfilled, there's a punishment for that. You get penalized for getting drunk in Muslim society. There's lashing. The Quran talks about it. When he was presented before the Prophet, before Abu Bakr, he told him, "Oh Abu Bakr, I lived in an environment and family circumstances in which I really did not know drinking alcohol was forbidden. I did not know. I was not aware of this law." What do you do now? Abu Bakr is thinking, is there a precedent in the Prophet's life? Did that ever happen? He thought and he thought, he couldn't figure that out. So in the end, he got stuck and he told him, "I don't know what to do with you. I don't have the law. I don't have the legal ruling." Now, is this possible that Allah will leave the ummah with a caliph who doesn't know how to address an incident like that? In the end, of course, they always had to resort to who? Imam Ali alayhi salam, and he solved the situation. And Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam talks about it. He elaborates on this incident. He says, Imam Ali alayhi salam he explained to them that this is the ruling. If this person really did not know, was not aware that this is forbidden by Allah, then yes, this person will not be punished. This person will not be flogged or lashed. But he has to prove that. Imam Ali alayhi salam asked him, "You never heard of the verse that says alcohol is haram? You never heard of that?" He says, "No, I swear by God, nobody read that verse to me." So the Prophet ﷺ asked some people in his neighborhood, Imam Ali alayhi salam asked some people in his neighborhood. He told them, "Did you ever recite this verse to him?" They thought, no, we don't remember reciting this verse. So it seemed that he was telling the truth, so they let him go. So this is an example of those caliphs of the ummah not knowing a specific ruling, because there was no precedent in the Prophet's life. Another example, Umar ibn al-Khattab was once asked about a man who divorced his wife 2 times in Jahiliyyah before he became Muslim. And then after he became Muslim, he divorced her a 3rd time. Now in Islamic law, if you divorce your wife the 3rd time, what happens? She becomes permanently haram to you, unlawful to you, unless she marries another man and he divorces her, then you can marry her the 4th time. That's Islamic law. Now Umar ibn al-Khattab was asked about this situation. This guy divorced his wife twice, but this was before Islam, in Jahiliyyah. Now that he became Muslim, he divorced her. Does that count, the first one or the third one, the third time?
It doesn't count.
He didn't know. He did not know that ruling. Because as far as he could remember, when he was living with the Prophet, nobody asked a question like that. The point is, so many legal details were not directly explained to the Muslims because the Prophet's stay in Medina was very short. 10 years full of wars and challenges and problems. How much can you explain to the people? That in itself tells us the Ummah is not qualified to represent the Prophet and explain all these details to the people. Besides, in addition to all of that, so many fabrications happened after the Prophet. How do you know, even let's say the Prophet did explain all of this. Let's say he did. Okay? But that did not reach the new generations of Muslims. They didn't hear the Prophet ﷺ. So many things were twisted, were changed, were forged. So many fabrications happened after the Prophet. In fact, Bukhari says, he himself, the author of Bukhari, he has like 5,000 or so hadiths in Bukhari. He says, I selected these 5,000 from how many? No, more. 600,000 hadiths. 5,000 from 600,000. That means, he's like, these are the reliable hadiths in my opinion. That means what? Over 500,000 hadiths are not reliable. How do you expect a Muslim to know what the Prophet said when you have all these fabrications? How is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to protect the truth from us if He leaves it up to the Ummah? Is that possible? That's not possible. That's unacceptable. We also see, for instance, Abu Dawood in his Sunan, he says, I selected my hadiths from 500,000 hadiths. You have Ahmad ibn Hanbal in his Musnad, he says, I selected these correct hadiths in my opinion from 750,000. That's 750,000 hadiths. That means there's so many fabrications that happened. So how do you know what the Prophet even explained, even if he did? How is the Ummah going to decide that for you? And they have different standards. Who said what the standard that Bukhari used, who said that's the right standard? Ahmad ibn Hanbal has a slightly different standard. Who said that's the right one? So many differences of opinion here. What do you do? And we're talking about essential matters. Many of them have to do with usul ad-din, the pillars of faith. So this is a big problem. That tells us the Ummah is not fit to figure out this for us. Now, a quick objection here, you referred to it. What do you say about today? The Imam ﷺ is in occultation. We do believe that God has assigned a leader for us, as we shall examine. But he's in occultation. Who is filling that void and gap during the ghaiba of the Imam ﷺ? See, our argument in the school of Ahlul Bayt is that the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, in those 2 centuries after the Prophet, they had 200 years, more than 200 years of time to explain the details of Islamic laws and Islamic beliefs, to raise a generation of scholars who would convey those truths to us. Whereas the Prophet ﷺ did not have the opportunity in 10 years of Medina to do that. How much could you do in 10 years with all those problems? In fact, most Muslims became Muslim when? The last 2 years of the Prophet's life, after Am al-Fath, after the conquest of Mecca. In 2 years, you're going to build scholars, you're going to raise scholars? That's impossible. That's absolutely impossible. Whereas the Imams of Ahlul Bayt had 2 centuries. Yes, there are some differences amongst the maraja and scholars when it comes to some legal matters. But look at the core of faith. The belief in Allah, the oneness of God, the attributes, imamah, nubuwwah, the day of judgment, the usul ad-din. 99% agreement. That's valid. 95% it's an agreement, 5% different. That's valid. That's a valid system. We're not saying we have to have 100% of the truth. Remember, God is also testing us, and that's part of the test. When it comes to fiqh legal matters, if you pick up the Risala Amaliyah, the book of rulings for your marja, I know there are some differences the scholars have, right? When it comes to sighting the moon, some other issues. But when you look at the thousands of rules they've discussed, 5,000 rules, 4,000 rulings, what percentage of these rulings do they disagree with? What do you think? Give me an educated guess. 5%. 5%. Exactly, probably even less than 5%. 5% difference, that means 95% they're in agreement. That is a system that works, that's fine. Logically, rationally, you'll accept a system that gives you 95%, the same results, maybe 5% differences. That's okay. See, that is a qualified system to give you the truth. But when you want to open the path for the entire ummah, since the day of the Prophet ﷺ, and all the Sahaba had different opinions and different ijtihadat, and you just want to see the tafsir of one verse, you've got 30 conflicting opinions. What do? That's not a qualified system. But when it comes to the path of Ahlul Bayt, within the school of Ahlul Bayt, within the system that they have given us, the differences are very little. They're very minor. So there's a lot to discuss about this, but briefly, this is how we would answer to that objection. That look in the end at the system overall. It's a working system that's giving you 95% the same results. And that's fine. And you have 5% differences, that's okay. Just like in any professional field, you have some differences here and there. That's okay. Therefore, we need someone to fulfill the role of that prophet. It cannot be the ummah. They cannot fulfill that role. Hence, Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, in one hadith says, Allahumma bala, la takhlu al-ardu min qa'imin lillahi bihujjah. He says, oh Allah, it's impossible for the earth to be void of your hujjah, of your proof, a human being who serves as your proof. Imma zahiran mashhura. Either this hujjah is visibly present, we have access to them, we can see them, أو خائفا مغمورا, or this person is in occultation. But in the end, we need God's hujjah on earth. لِأَلَّا تَبْطَلَ حُجَجُ اللَّهِ وَبَيَانَاتُهُ, so that the proofs of God remain valid. We have someone here on earth, physically present on earth, to serve as the source of guidance. That's extremely important, to have someone physically here on earth. You know, we all believe in the whispers of the devil, right? The Holy Quran talks about it. The devil is a physical being, who's from the jinn, of course, who acts upon us, so we deviate. The justice of Allah necessitates that there is also a physical being, who's the Imam alayhi salam, who represents the source of guidance, and he counteracts the effects of the devil. The Imam alayhi salam counters that. That's necessary for a physical being to be here on earth. Now here's a very important question. So we know that the Prophet must appoint someone to fulfill that role. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must choose that person. You can't leave it up to the ummah. Question here. Can a non-prophet achieve such high status of knowledge like a prophet? Is that even possible? Let's look at the Holy Quran. Does the Quran give us an instance of someone who was not recognized to be a prophet to have more knowledge than a prophet? Yes. The Quran does not mention his name, but the ahadith tell us the story of the Khidr. This is in Surah Al-Kahf, verse 65. فَوَجَدَ عَبْدًا مِّنْ عِبَادِنَا آتَيْنَاهُ رَحْمَةً مِّنْ عِنْدِنَا وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Musa alayhi salam, in which he comes across someone who had knowledge. Allah says, we gave him knowledge. Musa told him, can you share with me some of your knowledge? And you've all heard the story, and then what happened? When it came to certain issues, that righteous servant of God, who is the Khidr, had more knowledge than Musa in those matters. That means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give a non-prophet knowledge that is similar to the status of prophethood. This is not something that's incompatible with the Quran. We do have precedents in the Holy Quran. You've all heard the story of Prophet Sulaiman alayhi salam. And one of his aides, one of his successors, Asif ibn Barkhiyah, who was not a prophet, because he had some knowledge of the book, ilmun min al-kitab, he was able to even do supernatural things, like bringing the huge throne of Bilqis from Yemen to Palestine, because he had some knowledge of the book. So the Holy Quran gives us examples of individuals who were not prophets, yet they had this type of knowledge. So if we were to say the Imams of Ahlul Bayt have knowledge that prophets had, is that blasphemy? Is that problematic? Is that anti-Quran? What's the problem in that? We'll talk about the knowledge of the Imam in detail in the future. But this is just to tell us that we can have an Imam who fulfills the role of a prophet. Yes?
There's also the wise man, who wasn't a prophet.
The wise man Luqman, yes. Some scholars believe he may have been a prophet, but many believe he was a wise man. He was not a prophet. And he had insight from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah would reveal to his heart divine knowledge. And it's not proven that he was a prophet. We have many, many examples. So the Imam then clearly can fulfill the role of the prophet without any issues. Now there's another objection over here. The Holy Quran clearly in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 3, states, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum." Today I have completed your faith. You will find many scholars from other schools of thought citing this verse. Why do you need an imam? Religion has been complete. What's the need for an imam? Allah clearly states religion has been complete. You don't need an imam to explain anything new. Everything has been explained. How do we respond to this objection? Very briefly. We give two answers. One answer is a challenge to those other schools of thought. The second answer is to provide the real solution. When it comes to details of Sharia, you will find in Bukhari and in many other books, after this verse, which was revealed, other verses that explain Islamic rulings were also revealed. I'll give you an example from Bukhari. Bukhari says the last verse, the very last verse to be revealed in the Holy Quran is what? The verse of riba, the verse of usury or interest, that explains the laws of usury, and that it is haram. Okay, question. If you believe in this, I thought you just said, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum." When Allah revealed that verse, Allah has completed faith, everything has been explained. Then why does the Quran bring another verse which has to do with interest and explain it to the people? What does that tell you then about "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum"? Today I've completed your faith. This in itself is proof that when Allah said, "Today I've completed your faith," meaning the general guiding principles have been explained to people. But the details, no, some more details could follow. You think the Prophet after this verse, he did nothing? He just closed his door and sat down in his house, that's it. Religion has been complete, there's nothing for me to explain. Of course not. Verses would be revealed. Sometimes new rulings would be explained by the Prophet. Yes, we accept that the verse, "Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinakum," means that the general principles, the important core beliefs, core laws have been explained. No doubt about that. But the details, no. There's no contradiction here in saying religion has been complete, but some details will follow. That's fine. Sometimes you could write a constitution for the people and you will say the constitution is complete. But can't you have amendments? Can't you have some details about the constitution? Of course you can. That's not a contradiction. And so this is the second answer, which is the solution. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does say that I've completed faith for you, but Allah is not saying that every little detail has been explained to you. No. The main details of Islam, the core beliefs, the core ideas have been given to you now. But as for the details, you still need the presence of the Prophet in those days after the revelation of this verse, and you also need someone who represents the Prophet to explain many, many details which the Prophet ﷺ did not have a chance to explain. So this is how we address a verse like that. Now, before we examine the criteria for an imam, let's briefly talk about the shura over here. Because you will find other schools of thought, when it comes to the position of imamah, of who is an imam, they will tell you that we have the principles of shura mentioned in the Quran. Therefore, when it comes to choosing the imam or the khalifa or the successor, the Quran has instructed us to engage in shura. What does shura mean in English? Consultation. Meaning you, the ummah, gather and decide who the imam would be. We have to address this very important argument that other schools of thought have mentioned. Before we examine these two verses of shura, we have a very valid question here. If the way to choose the imam and the khalifa is by shura, then why is it that none of the first three caliphs became caliphs through shura? How is it that you're teaching Muslims in history that you guys need to choose your imam through consultation, but none of the first three caliphs were actually chosen through the system of consultation? Isn't that a joke? Let's briefly elaborate on that. As for the first Khalifa Abu Bakr, he was not chosen by shura. Initially, 5 pledged him allegiance. Then they intimidated others to follow. You think there was a referendum in Medina? Oh, people come. Let's do a shura and choose, this next Khalifa. No, a group of people, they happened to gather under the tent of Saqifa, and it just quickly happened. What about other villages and neighboring areas? How come they had no part in this shura? He was clearly not appointed by the shura. And the biggest proof that it wasn't shura, in Bukhari and other sources, when Umar ibn al-Khattab, when he describes how Abu Bakr was appointed, when he describes the first caliphate, you know what word does he use to describe it? Falta. What does falta mean? Slip. Something that suddenly happens without preparation. That's the meaning of falta. And he says, faltatun waqallahu sharraha. God really protected us from the slip. Wait a minute. Why are you describing the caliphate of Abu Bakr using a word like that? Does that mean there was really shura and it was an instruction of the Quran? Or it's something that you guys cooked and suddenly happened? And he says, Umar, this should not be repeated again. It's a falta, it should not be repeated again. Wait a minute, if it's a Quranic principle, why don't you want it to be repeated again? In fact, you should tell Muslims, just like we chose our first Khalifa, you guys should do the same. We don't see that. In fact, if Abu Bakr's caliphate and how he was chosen was according to the principles of Quran, then those who selected him like Umar should come out and proudly say, yes, that is how you choose a Khalifa and you teach the new generation of Muslims to do the same. That's something you should be proud of. This is something you should teach other generation of Muslims. But do we find that? No. Instead, what do we find? No, he's like, it was, a falta. It was a slip. It was something that just happened without any preparation, and it should not be repeated again. And that's why they did not repeat it again. That's the second argument here. How was the second Khalifa chosen?
Appointed.
He was appointed by who? What happened to the Shura? Where's the Shura? Just threw it out the window? What happened to the Shura? Third Khalifa, how was he appointed?
6 members.
By 6 people. How many Muslims were there in the Muslim Ummah? Thousands? Tens of thousands by that time? Why only these 6? Who came up with this criteria anyway, that you only have these 6 people? What kind of shura is this? And by the way, if really choosing the Khalifa is supposed to be through shura and consultation, don't you think the Prophet ﷺ should have explained to us what are the limits of this shura? Who's involved in it? Who's qualified? Who should be part of it? He just leaves it open-ended like that? At least tell us. Do the people of Medina count? Do we have to ask other villages? Okay, in Medina, you've got thousands of people. Who's qualified to be part of that shura? Everybody? All companions? Half of the companions? Those with these qualities? I mean, when you go to any country, to any organization, and they have an election system, in their bylaws, they have rulings on how this election is to be conducted, right? Do you find an institution which says, yeah, you should have elections, but I don't have a way for you to conduct elections. I don't know, just go and do it however you want. That's a joke. So if really it was shura, how come we don't see the Prophet explaining to us the procedure? So that in itself tells us khilafah and imamah is not by shura. And the biggest proof is that those first three caliphs, they did not even implement shura when it came to their khilafah. They want others to implement them. You guys should be role models for Muslims. If you didn't implement the shura, other Muslims are going to implement the shura. And that's exactly why throughout history you have dictatorships in the Muslim ummah. Where's the shura? Because those three set the precedent that it's by dictatorship. It's not by shura. That's a problem. Now let's briefly examine these two verses of the shura. The first one is verse 159 of Surah Ali Imran, the third chapter in the Holy Quran. 159. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. God is commanding the Prophet, consult them in the affair. That's the meaning of this verse. Some of them have cited this verse to say, yes, see, you have to consult. So when it comes to choosing the Khalifa, you have to consult. Let's technically analyze this verse. This verse is speaking to an authority, who is the Prophet ﷺ, whose authority has already been established. We know he's been chosen by God. Then the verse is telling the Prophet, you who are an authority and you are the leader, consult your companions when it comes to some issues. It's not saying that when it comes to choosing that leader and the one who has authority, you take the path of consultation and shura. Where in the verse does it say that? The verse is talking to someone who's already an authority, who's a prophet, whose authority has been already determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that you've been chosen by God, Allah is telling him, consult in some matters. That's all. That's all the verse is saying. Where in these words, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, do you understand that khilafah and the one who succeeds the Prophet should be by consultation? Where is that in the verse? The verse is not addressing that aspect. And I'll honestly ask you right now, look at this verse. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. 3 words. Consult them in the affair. Do you really, between you and God, do you see this verse talking about an important position, like who's going to succeed the Prophet? Do you see that in the verse? Do you see a clear instruction in the verse about this? About such a critical matter? Do you see that or no? If you do, we can discuss it, that's fine. So our argument is that this verse cannot be the basis for shura when it comes to selecting the Khalifa who represents the Prophet. And then that same verse says to the Prophet, you consult them, but in the end, the decision is yours. Because after that, the verse says, فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. The verse says, شَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Yes, consult them. But then, once you want to make the decision, you, not them. Once you're making the decision, rely on Allah and just do it. That means in the end, how many people are making the decision? One. So really, this is just a moral instruction to the Prophet. Ya Rasulullah, in the end, you have to call the shots. You're the Prophet. Just consult them. Respect them, make them feel important, make them feel that their opinion also counts. That's all. In the end, you're making the decision, not them. Which is even proof that this verse is about someone whose authority has already been established, who already has authority from God, and he's going to make the decisions. He just has to consult his companions just to show them respect. That's all. That's the first verse. The second verse, Surah Shura, verse 38. وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. And their affairs is a matter of consultation between them. So they're claiming that Khilafah is part of the affairs of these people, and therefore it's subject to consultation. Very brief point over here. Very brief objection. The verse is saying those affairs which belong to them should be subject to consultation and shura. Question: Khilafah and the Caliphate, is that the people's affair or the affair of God? Does this verse say anything about that? No. Why are they assuming to begin with that Khilafah is from the affairs of the people themselves? Then it would be subject to consultation. No. Maybe Khilafah is, as we shall see later, Khilafah is the dominion of God, not the dominion of people. So using this verse, like the verse of the Shura, and applying it to the Caliphate is a logical fallacy over here. Because they're assuming that Khilafah is part of the affairs and the dominion of the people, then that means they can consult about it. No, it could be the dominion of God. I'll give you an example. Let's say the Constitution says, the people, the citizens of this state, they decide and they elect on their affairs. And then you have the Supreme Court. Now in our country, who directly appoints the Supreme Court justices? Who appoints them? The President. Now can people come and object and say, no, wait a minute, the Constitution said, we the people decide on our affairs. Why is the President choosing and selecting the Supreme Court judges? When the Constitution says you decide on your affairs, that means those affairs that have been established to be your dominion and you can vote on them. But if something has been assigned to the President, that's not your dominion anymore. That's the President's dominion. Same thing over here. When it comes to Khilafah, we have Quranic evidence and prophetic hadith which says Khilafah is the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He chooses. So you can't subject that to the consultation. In any case, upon objectively, unbiasedly examining the verse of consultation, we see no clear reference to Khilafah. The Prophet did not talk about it and the limits of it. None of the first caliphs implemented it. And you want us to believe that this Khilafah is by consultation? Show us a historical precedent from the Prophet's life, from even the caliphs' lives. Fine. We'll accept that from the caliphs' lives. There isn't such a precedent. That means Khilafah, Imamate cannot be by consultation. There is no evidence for that. So next we are going to examine then how is the Imam chosen? Is there anything in the Prophet's life that tells us more about how an Imam is chosen? This is a very, very sensitive discussion. It's a very critical discussion too. Because most Muslims in history have not taken this evidence. So it's very important for us to discuss this and analyze this. And what about the verses of the Holy Quran? When it comes to the words and positions like Imam, Khalifa, what does the Quran say about them? Are they by the designation of God, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves it for the people to decide the Imam and the Khalifa? This is something that we will examine next week inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد.